So, did it live up to the hype? Yeah, it was great. I loved it. Like basically anybody who has read any amount of fantasy, I have been hearing about Terry Pratchett's Discworld series for quite a while now. And having read Good Omens last year and recently watching the TV show, I was curious to find out more about Pratchett and where he came from, and so I decided to check out Discworld, starting with Small Gods, because that's what a certain disheveled goblin told me I'm supposed to do. This book was more or less exactly what I was expecting it to be, and that is not a bad thing. I went in expecting it to be humorous, but with some deeper undertones, and that is exactly what this was. So the book was impactful, but it wasn't unexpectedly impactful. It was about as impactful as I expected it to be. And I think that's just because I went in already having heard a lot about Pratchett and Discworld, and knowing that it wasn't quite pure Douglas Adams, so to speak. It's not just pure comedy. There's actually a lot going on beneath the surface. So to quickly summarize, this book is about a boy with a photographic memory who is living in a sort of authoritarian, early modern state, which is heavily religious. And at the beginning of the book, he is very loyal to the regime ruling this state and an unquestioning follower of the morality they purportedly believe in. But as the book goes on, he starts to discover more things about the wider world outside of his narrow bubble that he's lived in, and realizes that he has been gaslit his entire life, essentially, in modern terms. And that revelation turns out to be very frustrating for him and leads him in some unexpected directions. So as I was saying earlier, Pratchett, he kind of hoodwinks you into thinking that this is going to be a funny story. Mainly because of the way it's written. He has this kind of deadpan style that allows for jokes to be delivered very effectively. And a lot of the characters at the beginning of the book seem a little bit one-dimensional. Brutha, our protagonist, is kind of this archetype of a kind of simple lower-class boy. He doesn't have many strong opinions about anything. He's not well educated. And on the other hand, you have Vorbis, this incredibly sinister inquisitor type figure who is responsible for torturing people within this world and getting confessions out of them. And while these characters seem a little bit archetypal at first, they become more and more complex as the story goes on. And especially in the case of Vorbis, Pratchett created a character who is just a really, really terrifyingly accurate portrayal of somebody who is trapped inside of their own minds and obsessed with their own sense of self-worth. And the way he describes Vorbis's thinking really shows that he knows a lot about how this type of person behaves. For example, there's this brilliant passage where Vorbis explains the difference between what he calls physical truth and fundamental truth, and basically uses this framework as a way of explaining why the fact that certain physical details about the world contradict his ideology doesn't actually affect his faith and his ideology. So, for example, while it might be literally true that he was directly responsible for the death of a certain man, it's not fundamentally true, according to him, because what's fundamentally true is just whatever happens to support his ideology. And it's so ridiculous, but it's also incredibly realistic, because this is the way that dictators and oppressors tend to think. And this type of thinking allows you to continue believing whatever you want to believe, regardless of what the facts are, or regardless of who you're hurting. Overall, the book is just really cathartic. Even though it's quite short, it feels like you've eaten a full-blown meal at the end of it. And the whole book is just sprinkled with these little bits of wisdom that made me go, yes, yes, thank you, Terry Pratchett. I just love the way that this author's mind works and his whole worldview. Terry Pratchett, his authorial voice is very present in this book. And as a person, he just seems so sane. I don't know how else to put it. He knows what he's talking about, and he's also just magnanimous and open-minded and playful. And it's just a delight to read and get inside his mind. So because this is my first Discworld book, I wanted to talk a little bit about the world building as well. because I knew going in that this was going to be somewhat absurdist. I mean, it's a book where the entire world is a flat disc that sits on the back of a turtle. So I wasn't expecting rigid world building necessarily. And yeah, that prediction also turned out to be accurate. The world building in this book is an absolute mess, but in a good way. For example, much of this story takes place in a nation called Ephebe, which is literally just a parody of what we imagine ancient Greece to be like. It's like every stereotype about ancient Greece compressed into one city in one time. So you have like philosophers just like running around the streets, getting into debates with each other. There's one character who almost seems like a kind of Diogenes figure who is fussy and kind of rejects society. And then there are also just randomly phrases in Latin or French or other Earth languages. And it's like, how did those even get here? What's going on? This style of lackadaisical world building where you just kind of like take elements of the real world and just mash them together, it feels so free in a way that a lot of world building isn't. It's not necessarily my preferred style of world building, but for the sort of thing that Terry Pratchett is going for here, I think it works perfectly. And then finally there's death, which I knew about Discworld's interpretation of death, but I didn't know he was going to be in this book. And I really, really liked his presence in this book. Every scene with death really left an impact, and the way he's woven into the story is so unique. I haven't really seen anything like it, where you just have individual side characters over the course of the story who die and meet death, and their story just kind of ends there. It's a really unique narrative device that I haven't seen replicated elsewhere. And without getting into spoilers, there are some moments with death in this book that are real highlights of the book. And I'm definitely excited to see more about this character in future Discworld books. That is pretty much everything I wanted to say about this book for now. I'm probably going to be reading some more Pratchett in the future. Let me know if you've read any other Discworld books and if you have any that you'd recommend. And be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, of course. And thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it.